So I'm going to run through the questions you've always wanted to ask a vegan, and of course there are vegans that would answer this very differently. Hopefully they're vegans that are vegan for ethical reasons rather than the ancillary benefits of health and the environment. But these are some of my quick responses to this. Some maybe not so quick, but most of them will be just off the cuff. So why did you become vegan? Well, back in about 15 years ago, I was just moseying about online and I happened to come across something about dairy. I'm not exactly sure how I came across this thing about dairy. I'm very grateful to whoever posted it, but it was actually the real runnings of the dairy industry and as a matter of course and what was economically efficient. And I might post a link to What's Wrong with Vegetarianism in the information section, and you can have a look at organic dairy, and that's pretty horrific as well. So when I discovered that, it was like somebody had thrown a bucket of ice water on top of me. I just remember being horrified. I don't know, I talk about just in my little species' haze and didn't realize that the male calves are killed as a matter of fact because they're really no use to the dairy industry. That's just one of many horrific things. So once I saw that, I thought, well, I can't eat that anymore, and I thought, I bet you that other forms of animal use are just as awful because this is dairy, and most people think that, dairy, there's no harm in that. But putting aside even the harm and the killing, because they kill the mother cows after about 5 years, and they take children away from them repeatedly and repeated impregnations, etc. So that's really awful. But putting aside those really awful things and tragic things of taking children away from their mothers and their mothers crying for days and all of that, then there's the simple fact that animals are sentient and we don't have the right to use them. If you look into the egg industry, well, that's a horror story too. And I'm talking free range, in quotes, because that's just industrialized now. That's just a scam to get people to buy expensive animal products. That's how I became vegan. I'd been vegetarian on and off during my life. That's really nowhere, really, because that's just non-veganism, basically, because there's still plenty of killing involved in eggs and dairy. And there's also all the other animal products, wool and all of that, leather, silk, honey. All those different products are results of violence as well. And I might put a link to some of the things from Gentle World, which is a vegan intentional community in Hawaii, and they have a blog, gentleworld.org, and they have a number of things: what's wrong with honey, what's wrong with backyard eggs, what's wrong with leather, and so forth. Maybe I'll just put the link to gentleworld.org and you can check that out. So that's really, it was just a horrific thing about dairy, which is just the normal runnings of the dairy industry, and that's why I became vegan. So that's a rather long answer. This might take a while. I might have to break this into two. And of course, when you find out later, just as an addition, when you find out later the tremendous cost on the environment, these are ancillary benefits. And then when you find the cost on your own health, dairy is not good for anybody, really. Neither are eggs, all the animal products. The cost on the environment, that largest study to date that I've posted numerous times on different videos, and you can check out my vegan playlist, Vegan and Anthropogenic Climate Change. Those playlists you'll find, I mentioned that numerous times, so that's the ancillary benefit of being vegan, is you're majorly addressing the climate crisis, and then of course you're really, really addressing your health as well, because animal products, particularly in the amounts we eat them, don't belong in our bodies. So number 2, is being vegan healthy? Well, I think so. If you eat a balanced plant-based diet, then that is definitely healthy. I think that eating animal products, particularly in the amounts we eat them, is a bit of a horror story for our bodies. It's just not. These products really aren't meant to be in our bodies, and I often refer to nutritionfacts.org, and please note a disclaimer about any sites, individuals, groups, organizations that I might mention in this, that I'm not necessarily endorsing them, and I don't endorse their future opinions because I don't know what they will be, or I don't know everything about them. But I know that nutritionfacts.org certainly has science-backed information. They scan all the latest nutrition journals, science medical journals, and they collate it all into the information into small, understandable videos, and I found them extremely helpful. I didn't really come across them until probably I'd been a vegan for a few years, and there were things that I didn't realize about health. For example, vitamin B12 is an important thing for vegans to take, and the reason that is because due to all the different processes that we do to vegetables and to the water, we actually have removed a lot of the B12 that used to be on vegetables and in the water. So it's important that vegans take B12, and I take about 2,500 micrograms of B12 every week. And if you don't take B12, homocysteine builds up in your blood, and that creates a thickening, and it ends up that you can, over time, end up having strokes and heart attacks. So it's important that anybody has B12, and I would say that even non-vegans probably might be low in B12. I think that's probably the case. But there's plenty of information on nutritionfacts.org about this issue. They're always putting out little videos. So check that out. And he's also, Dr. Grieger has also written a book, How Not to Die, and also a book associated with that called How Not to Diet. So do check that out. I also supplement with vegan vitamin D, D for David, but that's something that everybody should supplement, whether you're vegan or non-vegan, because there's widespread D deficiency, and with D deficiency you can open yourself up to all sorts of serious illnesses like cancer and diabetes, and it also makes you very susceptible when this COVID-19 pandemic happens. People that are low in vitamin D, and there are lots of people who are low in vitamin D, even ones that get plenty of sunshine. That's what I found out anyway. So, if you have low vitamin D, you're more likely to die of COVID-19. You're more likely to end up in ICU and die. So, vitamin D for David is very, very important. But that's something that everybody needs, whether you're vegan or non-vegan. The other one is omega-3. Algae-based omega-3s. They're available, vegan omega-3s. So those three things I supplement with. And a plant-based diet is absolutely delicious, and there's hundreds of thousands of recipes online. And there's more and more, if you like pre-made products, there's more and more commercially made vegan products, except I find that they're a bit vegan junk foody, and so I prefer not to eat that. But for those who like to have faux animal products, I'm not really so much like that at all. But for those who like, there's more and more of those plant-based faux animal products coming out too. If people sometimes they transition easier by eating faux animal products, and occasionally people might want to do that. But a whole foods plant-based diet, a balanced plant-based diet full of leafy greens and legumes and grains and all of that, if you have all of those in your diet, and you can have them in all kinds of combinations, and there's all sorts of ethnic dishes one can make, it's fantastic. So is being vegan healthy? I would say most definitely. Most vegans I know, no matter what age, they certainly are not on the medications that a lot of people who consume animal products decade after decade end up on. Like statins and all that for cholesterol, and they don't seem to have the same sorts of issues and health problems that non-vegans do. So I would say most definitely, and the results, the science-backed information, the evidence-based science-backed information seems to point in that direction. So as long as one is, supplementing with vitamin B12, and is eating a balanced plant-based diet, I'd say that that stands you in good stead, really. And one more thing, that the science indicates that people with diabetes, if you're eating animal products, that the fat in those animal products actually creates insulin resistance in the muscle. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the large diabetes organizations don't seem to let their followers sort of know that, because sometimes they're getting donations from places that sell animal products, or the animal industry, and that's really unfortunate. But that's something that there's people that have reversed diabetes type 2 by eating a balanced plant-based diet and not consuming those fat-laden animal products that cause insulin resistance in the muscle. But there's heaps of information, and once you understand the sorts of effects that animal products have on the body, and I'm talking about dairy and fish, eggs, once you understand how they affect the body and what they do and the diseases and illnesses they cause, they start to look like poison to you. That's how they look to me. When I see people ingesting animal products, apart from the fact that I think it's really sad, because I know these were once sentient beings, or they were the products from sentient beings that were meant for calves and all of that. Putting that aside, it's like I'm watching somebody consuming things that are killing them. The longer you become vegan, the more bizarre it becomes, looking at people or looking at animal products and thinking, I can't believe that people are actually consuming that. I just think of all the hormones and the bacteria and all of that sort of thing that are in them, the way they affect the body, the diseases they cause. I just think the health industry would be completely different. People who are nutritionalists, etc., I just wish that they would really get on board and understand how animal products really affect the body, and they wouldn't be promoting them. I'm often sort of shocked when I see nutritionalists promoting animal products to their clients. I just find that bizarre. And, I think there'd be a lot of different doctors who'd be almost out of a job, because if the world became plant-based, I think that there would be a tremendous amount of people who would not be dying every year from diabetes and heart disease and stroke. It would just revolutionize. It would just completely address a lot of the illnesses and all the things that go with that. It even improves depression. I can attest to that. It improved my depression 50%. I didn't even expect that to happen, but I noticed, and there's science-based evidence to that effect. I just think it's amazing, and I just rejoice in my mind when I think about the day that I became vegan. It was a great day, and I'm so glad that I did, for so many reasons. Of course, the main one is because I'm doing my best not to participate in violence against sentient beings, and that's happening every single moment of every day. Literally thousands of animals every second are being killed and tortured for trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure. Since we don't need animal products at all to survive, we can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So yes, I'd say it's healthy mentally and physically. Do you ever miss meat? No, not really at all. As I mentioned, when I see animal products, meat, dairy, eggs, etc., it feels like, I don't know, it. Apart from the fact that I look at it and think how sad it is, and the sentient beings that were tortured and killed for those unnecessary products, I also see them as just riddled with things that are just not good for us, like cholesterol and bacteria, diseases of different kinds that it contributes to. I mean, they just seem like, in some ways, like poison to me at this point, and just full of violence and poison. So that's how I feel about that. So no, and do I ever miss dairy and eggs? No. And I might have missed dairy a little bit in the beginning, but that went away quite quickly. And that was 15 years ago. And now, I mean, if anybody is, wants to have things that are similar to animal products like dairy, there's so many different vegan, plant-based cheeses basically now, and that's ever increasing. And I just don't really miss those kind of things. I think the options of different plant-based recipes, different plant-based dishes are just endless, and there's so many different ethnic dishes one can make. I just don't really think that way. I haven't thought that way for a long time about dairy and eggs and all of that. For anybody who's interested, there is a product that's come out called Just Eggs, I think it's called, and it's made from mung beans, and apparently that's very, very similar to eggs. And but I just am quite happy just eating a plant-based diet, different, Indian, all sorts of different kinds of cuisines, and that's just fine by me, and it's just delicious and so healthy. So no, I don't really miss meat and other animal products. Do you only date other vegans? I don't date anymore. I have a partner, but when I got together with my partner, they were not vegan when I got together with them, and neither was I. But about a year and a half later, we both became vegan after I came across that description about dairy, a real description about what happens in the dairy industry, and we both decided to become vegans. So that was pretty simple. I think you might start off that way, maybe non-vegan, and then something happens, and then boom. Then there's another question here: why aren't you skinny? People can be all different sizes being vegan. You can manage to overeat when you're vegan, because it's, as I say, it's really yummy. And any diet one consumes, one can put on weight. It's a matter of calories and exercise, really. Isn't being vegan expensive? Well, only if you're buying all these pre-made products. That can turn out to be very expensive, and I don't think that's at all necessary to buy pre-made products. They're usually junk food, and they're not good for you. So, no. And any restaurants and cafes that charge an arm and a leg for their vegan meals, I find that really unfortunate, because, the plant-based ingredients are not expensive. They just, unfortunately, a lot of restaurants and cafes take advantage of the fact that vegans are sort of a bit of a captive audience in a way. If you go into a restaurant, you can find things that are accidentally vegan, but if you go to actual vegan restaurants that don't sell anything but vegan meals, plant-based meals, then it can be very expensive. So I don't really go out to restaurants really much unless there's a reason to. I prefer to actually eat my own food. I think my food is just as yummy as the vegan restaurants, the food that they tend to serve up. So, as I say, it's just delicious. Another question here: do you ever cheat? Cheat in quotes. No, I mean, this is the thing. Cheating in quotes, that means eating little bits of animal products, sometimes thinking, well, that won't hurt. No, because I recognize that's products of violence, and just like with any ethical position, if you recognize something is wrong and it's violence, then you do your best to avoid participating in that. If you want to be anti-racist, you do your best to address your own racism within yourself and try and make sure that you are doing your best not to be racist in your speech and actions, etc. And the same with veganism. Veganism is an ethical position. And so if we truly believe that sentient animals are not here for us to use as resources, then that means that we don't cheat in quotes. We don't sort of, if we went to a restaurant or we went to an event and there wasn't one vegan thing to eat, we're not going to go, well, there's not anything to eat, so I'm going to have some cheese on a cracker or something. or I'm going to have this egg salad or something. You just don't go there in your mind because you've made this ethical decision and you know what those products represent. You know that animal products are a result of tremendous violence. Doesn't matter if they're free range in quotes or enriched caged eggs or whatever. You just know that they're products of violence. And also, even if those animals had the most wonderful life and they were still alive and they weren't killed when they became non-productive, those products are still theirs. They're not mine. They belong to those animals. The eggs, the dairy that was meant for the calves, they don't belong to me. So I don't see them as mine to take. And that's something that we need to think about, that these, the fur on these animals and the eggs and the silk from silkworms that, by the way, are boiled alive to get the silk, the honey from bees that, one bee is flown thousands of miles to get a teaspoon or two of honey. They use that for their hive, and their hive becomes sick if that honey, which is often taken away and replaced with a kind of a syrup, and that causes sickness in the hive. We're stealing the life-sustaining honey that they produce for themselves and for the queen. So it's just not ours to take. And, bees get hurt as well. So we need to stop thinking that they're here for us to use, that those products from them are ours. Even the backyard hens, people think that that's okay to use the eggs from hens in their backyard because they're not being raised in the manner that industrialized hens are being raised in. No, those eggs are actually theirs, and they actually are attached to those eggs. And I'm going to leave a link to What's Wrong with Backyard Hens, Backyard Eggs. That's from gentleworld.org, and it's also from my vegan resource, howtogovegan.org, and it explains what's wrong with that. So we have to change our way of thinking about animals, and just because they're a different species and because they're vulnerable doesn't mean that we can go around raising them to be killed or to be used, their skin on their back or their fur, or taking honey from bees and all of that. They're not here for us to use, and that's something we need to get our head around. The simple answer to that, do you ever cheat? No, it's an ethical position, and I take it seriously, just like any other ethical position, just like being anti-racist or avoiding homophobia or avoiding being transphobic, all that kind of thing. They're all ethical positions against a discrimination that is about an irrelevant criterion, and in this case, species. They belong to the moral community just like we all do. And there's another question here. If we all went vegan, we'd be overrun with animals. If we all went vegan, wouldn't all the animals die out? Well, animals are bred, domesticated animals are bred into existence by the billions every year, and a lot of those animals cannot reproduce naturally because they've been inbred and bred and bred and bred until they can't produce naturally. So they're often artificially inseminated. A lot of the turkeys are artificially inseminated, cows are artificially inseminated, all sorts of domesticated animals. So if we're breeding them into existence by the billions, once the planet became mostly vegan, we wouldn't be breeding those animals into existence by the billions to be used. And so they eventually would die of old age, and we wouldn't be letting them reproduce because domestication is just such a messed up thing in so many ways. There are cows that are bred to the size where they can barely stand. It's just appalling. It's an abomination. Cows, the dairy cows, their udders are so large, they get mastitis, they can barely walk. It's really painful. That's how they're genetically bred, to have gigantic udders. That isn't normal. And it's not normal for a cow to grow to the size where they can barely walk. just so that we can have plenty of, flesh from them. And the same with wool on sheep. It's not normal for the amount of wool that they produce, and on it goes. It's an abomination, and it's just awful. And so the reason there's so many on the planet is because we're breeding them by the billions. That wouldn't be the case, and when we became vegan, we would look after them and let them, and of course allow them to live out their natural life. And then eventually those domesticated animals would end. But of course these animals were domesticated and they were bred this way, and we don't want animals to be suffering like that, suffering because they've been bred a certain way. The same with dogs. Look at the dreadful things that dogs are put through. They have breathing difficulties because they're bred that way. They have all sorts of, they have hip problems. There's a whole lot of problems that come with the sorts of awful things that we've done to animals just because we want to look at them and we think that looks attractive. It's just not right. So, and then somebody asks, many animals kill for food, why shouldn't we? Well, we can make the moral decision not to be killing animals, and we don't need to kill animals because there are plenty of places that we can get food from. We don't need to be going around and killing animals. And a lot of people say they're doing it because they're killing animals for food, and they think that's better than buying it from the shops. Well, animal products from the shops. Well, since we don't need animal products at all to survive, and we can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources, we don't need to be killing those animals. And even if there was a time in human history where people may have had a reason, maybe there was absolutely no food whatsoever around, I don't know. But whatever the case, I don't think it was ever a good idea, but whatever the case, it's not like that now, and most people on the planet can get access to food. They don't need to be going around killing. People in remote places get things flown in. Even up in remote places, they get there are shops nearby. There's things flowing into those places, and most of us have access to food. Most of us. Except in areas where there's been war-torn imperialism has been creating havoc in that country, and it's created famines and all sorts of things. But, generally speaking, most places can get food, and we don't need to be murdering animals to do it. And this whole thing of, well, tigers and lions kill, why can't we? Well, they can't make that moral decision not to kill other animals, and they are also obligate carnivores. That is their diet. We are robust frugivores, really. People say, well, we're omnivores, but if you ever looked at the dentition of a dog and then look at our dentition, it's very, very different. They can rip flesh, they can eat raw meat, there's no problems, they can deal with the prolific amounts of bacteria and stuff. We can't. We get really sick if we, go and eat raw flesh. And we have hands for grabbing fruit off trees. We have dentition that is for grinding up plant products. We have long intestines for digesting plant-based foods. And, obligate carnivores have very short intestines. So anyway, basically what I'm saying is that we can make the moral decision not to kill. And there's no need to do that either. There's no really good reason that we should be going around, except that people will use that excuse. But really they like killing for entertainment. A lot of people who say they are hunting for their food, they really just like killing for entertainment and going out with their friends and sitting in bushes and killing. That's really what's underneath that all. I'm sorry if that sounds judgy, but that's really underneath it all, if you really, really looked into where that's coming from. this other one isn't eating meat natural. Well, I've just talked about our intestines and our hands and our dentition, and I would invite you to check out Mike the Vegan, sorry. He has a site, and basically it's almost like a frequently asked questions about veganism. It's MIC the Vegan. He does all kinds of videos that address all sorts of different questions. So I would check that out because he goes right into that. And I don't have the time. This will be the longest episode if I don't flick through these questions. And I'll just say that, humans have only eaten meat in a relatively recent evolutionary history, and that's when they developed tools like spears and fire, and we only started farming, basically, in recent times, which is hardly natural. And eating meat is, on a daily basis is a very recent thing. And since the advent of factory farming after World War II, it's kind of, factory farming is really about meeting the demand for animal products. It basically brought the cost of rearing animals down, and there was this big meat explosion as a result. In 1946, for example, the number of poultry eaten in Britain was 31.9 million, and in 2001 it was over 800 million. So there's nothing natural about industrialized farming or live exports or slaughterhouses. There's nothing at all. Isn't it okay to eat animals if they've had a good life? Well, I guess one could say, is it okay for me to knock you on the head if you've had a good life and kill you and steal your possessions? You'd probably say no. And if I said, well, what if I came up behind you and shot you in the head and you didn't even know that it happened? Would that be a problem? And you would probably say yes, because it's taking my life. Well, that's the thing. Death is a harm. Taking someone's life, whether it's human or non-human, that is their precious life to them. They love life just like we do and do not want to die. Is it okay to torture and kill animals for completely unnecessary reasons simply because we like the taste of them? That's really the question. And I would say, no, it's not. That's not morally justifiable. And whether they've had a good life or an awful life, it's still their life, and they love life just like we do, and they don't want to die. So, no. And the only way we can justify that in our mind, that it's okay to do that, is if we think that they are lesser than us. And the reason we would think they were lesser than us is because they are different. They are not the same species. But that's the same sort of ignorance that we have when we think a different race is lesser than us because they have a different skin color, or they look different, or their way of being is different. And the list goes on of discriminations based on irrelevant criterion. Isn't it good that I only eat organic, free-range fish, dairy, chicken? Well, as I've mentioned before, those products like eggs and dairy, they're products from a sentient being, and dairy was meant for the calves. That dairy is taken from the mother, and is often replaced with artificial supplements for the calves if they're female, and if the calves are male, then they're killed. And that happens on organic farms. Organic farms only keep their cows and other animals until they're not productive anymore, and then they're killed. It's very rare that any cow or any other animal in an organic farm is going to be kept alive after they're not productive, because those organic farms need to make money. They need to be economically efficient. We may think that it's better to consume quote-unquote humane animal products, but in the end those animals are killed. They still have their children taken from them. They still are subjected to non-consensual acts of confinement and some sorts of mutations. And in the end, no matter how well they're treated, it's not about their treatment, really. It's never been about their treatment. If you're vegan, you're against the use of animals, period. You're not really concerned about how animals are treated because they shouldn't be used at all. And that's where a lot of vegans make the mistake too of promoting this so-called humane animal use, which is really a myth. And it also states the understanding there when you promote humane animal use is that you're saying to the public that it's morally justifiable to use animals as long as it's done humanely. But that is not really the case. Firstly, it's not humane. If that was applied to humans, it would be considered torture. It's also slavery. We agree that slavery of humans is wrong, so I don't know why we think enslaving and torturing and killing non-human sentient animals is okay. That's just speciesist and it's violence. So this myth of humane animal use is really a myth when you look at it, and I'll post that essay to What's Wrong with Vegetarianism, which goes into the so-called free-range eggs, and it also goes into organic, in quotes, dairy, and what goes on there. And you will see by the description there is nothing that is good about it. And we would be kidding ourselves to think it's okay. I won't go into it here, but I invite you to please check it out. I will leave a link in the information section of this video on Faint Signals from Vega, so please check that out. So no, all those different forms of organic have their own problems, and it's all non-consensual. It's all using sentient animals as resources, and that's the bottom line is veganism is an ethical position, and we reject using sentient animals as property. The aren't plants sentient, I'm going to leave that to Mike the Vegan to explain. I'll leave a link to, he's actually talked about that I think at least once, and because it's when people ask that question, but what about plants? It's really basically grasping at straws. It really is. The bottom line is we know animals, non-human animals, are sentient. We know that, and that includes fish. Fish are sentient too. And sentience means they're self-aware. So we know that already. So we shouldn't be using animals who are self-aware, who are sentient. And there aren't levels of sentience. You either are sentient or you're not. We're not sure if plants are sentient. And I also invite you to check out the book, Mind If I Order the Cheeseburger, and Other Questions People Ask Vegans, and that's by Sherry F. Cobb, C-O-L-B. That's a very good book, and she addresses the whole aren't plants sentient question. But usually when people say that to vegans, they're usually trying to do some sort of gotcha question or trying to be clever, and they're really not. If you actually cared about plant sentience, you'd be vegan, because vegans actually eat less plants than animals do. And if you're eating animals, that means that you're eating indirectly all the plants that those animals are eating. So basically, cows and other animals eat a lot more plants, and that includes the grain, because they're often fed grains in these large feedlots, which is not good for them, but they're fed a lot of grain as well. And a lot of products, byproducts of soybean production. And by the way, most of the soy on the planet is grown to feed animals in these feedlots. Most of the soy that's grown in the Amazon rainforest is grown to feed animals in feedlots. Just in case people go, well, vegans eat soybeans and soybeans are destroying the Amazon rainforest. No, animal use is destroying the rainforest at 2 acres a minute at this point. It's being cleared for animal agriculture, 2 acres a minute. So anyway, I'm getting off the track, but no, it's something that the plant sentient issue is something that, as I mentioned, those 2 sources, you can go and check them out. I'm not going to go into the whole thing of plant sentience right now. But I will say though that it kind of makes me laugh when I see it, and we are not sure that plants feel pain, and they don't have pain receptors, nerves, or a central nervous system. The screaming that sensitive equipment have detected when plants are damaged is thought to be caused by movement of gases. The cut releases the pressure, allowing gases inside the plant to move towards the cut, making noise as they do. As I said, the average non-vegan is responsible for much more plant consumption via eating animals. And there's another question here: why don't you eat fish? Fish aren't sentient. And, well, yes, they are, and that's been scientifically proven. So we'll move on from that one. Don't you feel like you're sacrificing to be vegan? Absolutely not. I hope that I've made that fairly clear in this in these questions, that I often say I'm so glad I'm vegan. It's something that I say in my head fairly regularly, not just because it's just such a wonderful thing to not consume violence, but that a plant-based diet is delicious, and I like that I do my best not to wear animal products on my body and on my feet, etc. I do my best, to try and avoid animal products as much as possible, and that's very difficult in a society where animal use is pervasive. There's animal products in computers and tires and roads, and there's animals have been used to build buildings, and animal products are in lots of things, and so it's almost impossible to avoid using animal products indirectly. But what we can do is avoid the very obvious animal products like meat, dairy, eggs, fish, leather, wool, fur, silk, honey, etc. All those different animal products, we can do our best to avoid them. They're very obvious, and they're very obvious violence. So no, I don't. I am so happy and grateful that I came across some information that turned me to becoming vegan, that shocked me into realizing what I was participating in. I'm very grateful. I wish I knew who the person was that posted that thing about dairy, and I'm very grateful to them, and I've done my best over the last 15 years or so to try and spread that message about veganism to other people, that it's an ethical position. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who only talk about health, or they only talk about the environment, and that's really not what veganism was meant to be. It was the term was coined by Donald Watson in 1944, and he was talking about the ethical reasons to be vegan, and so that's what it is. But anyway, as I say, I'm incredibly grateful that I am vegan, and I want others to be vegan because I know that it will be great for other animals, obviously, because we will never have peace on the planet while we're torturing and killing 1 to 3 trillion land and aquatic animals every year. That is not going to happen. It won't, that sort of violence doesn't stay in a vacuum, and we're destroying the planet, and we won't be able to sustain animal agriculture. By 2050, we won't be able to feed the population with animals at all, and we shouldn't be doing that. It's also destroying our health. There are so many people who are dying completely unnecessarily because they're ingesting these animal products in great amounts. There are so many. There's a list as long as my arm of reasons why we should be vegan, and why it's just a case of it's a moral imperative in so many ways. So every day I just hope that in some way I can influence somebody to become vegan. It makes me so happy to find out somebody has become vegan, and that's so many animals that won't be bred into existence. Every time somebody becomes vegan, that's at least 100 animals every year that won't be bred into existence to be tortured and killed for trivial reasons. So I look forward to one day, and hopefully this might happen before we go extinct as a species, because that's looking more and more like that will be the case because of at this point it looks like runaway global warming. But I was hoping that maybe we might have a vegan planet before then. I don't know if that'll happen. But no, I don't feel like I'm sacrificing to be vegan. And I hope that anybody else who becomes vegan doesn't feel like that either. And by the way, anybody who says they're ex-vegan was probably never vegan, because just as when you reject racism, it doesn't mean one day you think, I don't want to do that anymore, I'm going to be a big racist again. An ethical position, when it's embraced, if it's embraced properly and in a real way, you're not going to go back on that. And that's the same with veganism. When you embrace the ethical position that animals aren't our resources and they're sentient, then you won't be going back. Even if you were the only person in the room who was vegan and there weren't any plant-based products to eat at an event, you'd rather go hungry than eat animal products, because that's just how it is. Why not do something for human rights instead of animal rights? Well, I see them as both connected. Non-human animal rights and human animal rights are closely connected. I point this out many times in my videos. Where you have one form of discrimination, in the case of this speciesism, you'll have all forms. They're all faces of the same ignorance. They all otherize a group based on an irrelevant criterion. In the case of animals, it's species. And so you're going to have all kinds of discrimination if you have speciesism, because animals are the most vulnerable group on the planet. So if we think it's just fine to discriminate against them, to torture and enslave them because they're a vulnerable group, then we're going to do that to other vulnerable groups, and we do. And it's becoming more and more like that, the way humans are treating other humans. And it's been like that throughout our history. And it's not an either or. You can be vegan and you can be for human rights, and that's what I am. I am vegan and I'm anti-imperialist and anti-war, and I'm for human rights. I try and stand up for human rights wherever possible. And I'm vegan. We can walk and we can chew gum at the same time. It's not an either or. And if somebody is vegan and they're not interested and they don't care about human rights, then I think that's very sad, because I don't know why that's the case, and I hope that changes for those people. But vegans need to be anti-imperialist and anti-war, because we need to care about all forms of rights, whether they're human or non-human. And we can be all those things at the same time. The last one here I think this is the last question, but veganism is a personal choice. Why impose your personal views on me? Well, it ceases to be a personal choice when we're responsible for the torture and killing of 1 to 3 trillion sentient animals, land and aquatic, every year. It ceases to be a personal choice when there's that sort of carnage, that sort of violence, and also when it's destroying the planet and it's destroying the health of people. It ceases to be a personal choice when when animal agriculture is one of the major drivers of the climate crisis. And I bring up that Dr. Joseph Paul's largest study to date, 114 countries, 40,000 farms from farm to fork, 90% all the products that we eat. The result of that largest study to date was that a vegan diet is the single most important thing anyone can do to address not only the climate emergency, but also acidification, eutrophication, land use, water use, and a whole host of things. It's the single most important thing we can be. It's a moral imperative to be vegan at this point, and it always has been, but at this point we are deluding ourselves if we think that it's some sort of personal choice, in quotes, that it's something that we can do after everything else is fixed. We can address capitalism and get that all sorted, and then we can be vegan. A lot of people they're on the left, a lot of people are on the left, and they are doing their best to avoid this issue, kicking and screaming basically to try, I don't even know how they manage to avoid it as they do, because it's not like it's some fringe philosophy now. It's in the mainstream. There's a lot of people on the left doing their best to ignore it, and I wish that they wouldn't, because I really believe, and I'm sorry if people find this judgmental, but I really believe if we're truly against violence toward the vulnerable, if we're anti-imperialist and anti-war, and yet we don't mind that we've colonized a whole group, the largest population on the planet, that makes us dwarf. I mean, 99.99% of the planet is non-human, and we've basically colonized them and driven them out, and we hunt and kill and drown and trap and terrorize and use them for entertainment and breed them in all sorts of bizarre ways. We've basically terrorized and destroyed their planet and them since we've been on this planet ourselves, and we are probably going to go extinct, and we're probably going to take most of them with us because of this climate emergency. It's an abomination what we've done to them. And the least we can do, the minimum standard of decency, particularly those on the left, the least we can do is go vegan and stop using these sentient animals who love life just like we do. And every single moment of every day they're being tortured and killed. If you've never been to a slaughterhouse, they're horrific. There is nothing humane about slaughterhouses. There is nothing humane about any of these forms of animal use, the pretend humane use of quote-unquote free range and all of that. They're all horrific, and if they were applied to humans, it would be considered torture. So I implore people on the left in particular to stop ignoring this issue and stop pretending like it's not important. Stop making excuses to yourself. Stop saying that it's some sort of personal choice or something we can do later, or like Extinction Rebellion pretending that it's not important. I mean, the excuses are just breathtaking. And we know it's wrong. Because every time anybody finds out that I'm vegan, they start making all these excuses like, oh, I don't eat much meat. I didn't ask them to make an excuse or say stuff like that. But when people find out you're vegan accidentally, they start making excuses and saying they don't eat much meat, or they don't, they think it's all about meat. No, it's dairy, eggs, and all that. It doesn't make me feel better to hear I don't eat much meat. That doesn't make me feel better. I just want people to stop and think about what they're doing, and think about that they don't need to be doing it. If we can live our life without harming and killing, why wouldn't we do that? Of course there's going to be accidental harm. When you're walking around, you might accidentally step on an ant or whatever. That's unintentional, but this is literally intentional harm, what we're doing. Intentional harm to vulnerable beings, vulnerable sentient beings who are self-aware and love life just like we do. I really, really hope that people will really start to think about what they're participating in and do the right thing. That's what I'm hoping. Oh, what's the difference between vegan and vegetarian? I think I've covered that. Well, vegan is rejecting animal products, dairy, eggs, fish, silk, honey, meat. You're basically, it's an ethical position, and you're rejecting animal use, period. So you don't view animals as property, and you don't want to use them as property, so you're doing the best you can to avoid using animals, period. A vegetarian still uses animals, still eats dairy, eggs, and wears leather, wool, etc., and eats honey, all of that. So it's really just non-veganism. And then there's, where do you get your calcium and protein? I invite you to check out nutritionfacts.org, and I've mentioned that earlier. Calcium, I have above average bone density, so I'm doing just fine with my calcium intake, but it's important that we have vitamin D. Everybody should be taking vitamin D to help with their calcium formation, and you can get plenty of calcium through plants and beans. So, if you have a balanced plant-based diet, you're going to get enough calcium. And there's calcium in sesame seeds, there's calcium in rhubarb, there's calcium in leafy green vegetables, there's calcium in beans. You just have to do a little bit of research and there it is. But balanced plant-based diet's very important. Now, the protein issue is funny because vegans get 75% more protein than they need every day. There's plenty of protein in plants. Plenty of protein. I mean, look at gorillas. They eat plants all the time. Where do they get their protein? From plants. There's plenty of protein in plants. Here's another one. Why do vegans always have to tell everyone they are vegan? The thing with this is, if you don't talk about veganism at some point, then how are other people going to become vegan? And since it's an ethical position, and it's not some quote-unquote personal choice, it's an ethical position which, if there aren't more vegans on the planet, there's basically more and more animals are going to be bred into existence to be tortured and killed. So it's all about vegan education. And it's important to talk about veganism. It's not because we like the sound of our own voice, or we think we're better than anybody, or it's some sort of judgment, or it's some sort of elite club or whatever. No, it's the minimum standard of decency to be vegan. Just as somebody said once, I'm vegan for the same reasons that I'm not a cannibal. It's basically just something that it's so important, particularly now. But if you don't talk about it, if you don't do vegan education, then people aren't going to know about it, and so it's never going to spread. Fortunately, since I've become vegan, veganism has spread very tremendously, actually, which has made me very happy, because when I first became vegan, it seemed like it was moving in it was very, very slow. And I was worried that it was never going to take hold, but I'm not worried anymore. I feel like it's taking hold in a very strong way, and I think that that's just going to exponentially spread. And that's only in the last, in particular, in the last 10 years I've noticed, in the last 5 years I've noticed how much it's taken hold. So that makes me really, really happy. I feel like it won't go back from here. So why do vegans always have to tell everyone they're vegan? Well, because it's really important. It's really, really important. It's about ethics, and if we don't talk about it, then it's not going to spread, and that means that there's going to be trillions of animals are going to suffer and be killed, and on top of that, the planet is going to continue to be destroyed as well. So that's why. Just like it's important to be anti-racist, or it's important to be against heterosexism, homophobia, or transphobia, it's something that requires education, and if we shut up about it, it's never going to spread. So I think that I've just about covered these different questions I see here. If you can think of any other questions, please put them in the comment section, and I will do my best to talk about them. I've kind of flown through these other ones because I thought this could be the longest episode in the world if I don't fly through them, and I hope that I've answered them in some okay fashion. I probably could have done better, but that will do for now. So anyway, if you can think of any other questions, please leave them in the information section. So thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please go vegan. Check out my comprehensive vegan resource, howtogovegan.org. Till next time, bye for now.